can't just take the bus on into the city.
You don't know San Francisco, Butters. It was the breeding ground of the hippie movement in the 60s. There's hardcore liberals, lesbian activists, and die-hard modern hippies, young and old. I swore I would never set foot in San Francisco. God help me. Can't believe I'm actually gonna walk through San Francisco. Well, here goes.
In 2022, Michael Shellenberger ran an unsuccessful bid to be governor of California. Here is his campaign ad from that race.
Broad daylight, I saw someone get raped.
I was raped, bullied, picked on, stripped naked, robbed.
Somebody gets stabbed.
I mean, like someone robbed me with a machete today of all my stuff.
Hit in the head with crowbars and bats.
I saw a dude get shot in the back of the head.
Somebody getting shot?
Do they live?
No.
You will end up getting hurt out here.
The other homeless people are like your worst enemy.
These people do not play out here.
Besides, I have weapons. I have my protections.
Okay. What kind of weapons?
Bats, hatchets, knives, mace, tasers.
And what's your drug of choice, brother?
Heroin.
Crystal meth.
Meth and heroin.
Crystal meth.
Meth?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that doesn't smoke.
You don't know anybody that doesn't smoke meth?
No.
We saw a woman who was pregnant just now.
Yeah.
What is she smoking?
Fentanyl.
She's smoking fentanyl? And she's 8 months pregnant?
Yeah.
So are you seeing more people showing up in psychotic states naked now than, say, 2-3 years ago?
Yes, I think so.
I don't know what they're putting in this stuff. I don't know if it was aliens. I'm not trying to sound crazy and stuff.
No, it's fine.
Must be causing all these like psychological breakdowns. And I think that they had put like a transmitter or something. Because I was able to hear and communicate, and it looked like I was talking to myself.
My job was to intake homeless individuals on the street.
I don't have to be on the street. I just choose to be.
You just choose to be?
A lot of people are out here because they want to be out here.
Everyone's usually has a serious drug problem.
They kind of quit society.
This right now is literally by choice.
Did you get the sense that Pat cared whether they were on drugs or not?
No, and I'm not trying to be like crazy with it, but definitely not.
I mean, if we're gonna be realistic, they pay you to be homeless here.
They make it so easy and normalize it.
Drug dealers are just being let go over and over and over.
It's like the cops are, it's like they're your neighbor, you know?
They enable them because they allow the open air drug market.
Open street dealing like that, with the cops just across the street, like, watching them.
I think they've given up on the people that are out there on the street.
I've never seen anything like it, and I've been in the game for fucking 30 years, dude. Never seen anything like it.
In 2021, he released San Fransicko, a thoroughly researched investigation into the crisis of homelessness in San Francisco. The picture he paints is one of incompetence, corruption, and a homeless industrial complex blinded by a mixture of ideology and arrogance to the harm they inflict upon their community. San Francisco has a history of its political establishment cultivating insanity, having been the birthplace of Jim Jones's The People's Temple. Jones' own son believes that Jones may have swung a mayoral election in George Moscone's favor. We loaded up all of our 13 buses with maybe 70 people on each bus, and we had those buses rolling non-stop up and down the coast into San Francisco the day before the election, said Jones Jr. Could we have been the force that tipped the election to Moscone? Absolutely. Slam dunk. He only won by 4,000 votes. When federal investigators looked into fraud claims 3 years later, they discovered that all of the records were missing from the city of San Francisco's registrar of voters.
Receiving special assistance from law enforcement in Indianapolis, where Jones began his ministry 20 years ago, and Mendocino County, where his church took root. It was there in Ukiah where Jones apparently established a pattern of popularity among political figures. In Los Angeles, a spokesman from the district attorney's office told the LA Times that their 6-month investigation had been deliberately squelched because of Jones's influence among local politicians. The spokesman said his office had received letters from influential people trying to head off the investigation. Jones delivered large blocks of votes, he said. Our investigation went nowhere. In San Francisco, the DA's office had received complaints ranging from child abduction to homicide. A frustrating one-year investigation proved inconclusive. The FBI is now delving into this apparent immunity from prosecution that Jones had miraculously acquired throughout his 20-year career.
San Francisco's establishment stood by Jones even after a California magazine, New West, owned by Rupert Murdoch, published an expose of Jones's beatings of temple members and financial abuses in August 1977. The article was written by a San Francisco Chronicle reporter and was meant for the Chronicle to publish. But the newspaper killed the story because it didn't want to alienate Jones, whom it viewed as central to its plan to expand the Chronicle's circulation in the heavily African-American Fillmore district. Jones also managed to avoid investigation and prosecution in part by getting the district attorney to hire as deputy district attorney Jones's longtime attorney and confidant. Afterwards, Jones went on to build Jonestown in Guyana, and we all know what happened there. The first problem Shellenberger identifies is the insistence on permanent housing over emergency shelters. Progressives in San Francisco have opposed creating sufficient shelter space for the homeless since at least 2004, when then-Mayor Gavin Newsom's Homelessness Task Force proposed a phase-out of emergency shelters in lieu of permanent supportive housing. The Reverend Andy Bales, who Shellenberger interviewed, who runs one of the emergency shelters, says, "Housing first is a dogmatic philosophy. I've lost friends. One of my closest friends is attacking me for pushing housing that costs $11,000 instead of $527,000 per person. He can't get that we can't provide a $527,000 to $700,000 apartment for each person on the street. I've been in planning meetings where people said, everybody deserves a granite countertop, but that isn't going to work for 44,000 people." In mid-2021, city officials announced that $1.1 billion would be used for 1,000 new shelter beds, 825 new housing units, 650 rental subsidies, 200 tents, and more outreach. As a result, the city's shelter bed capacity will rise from 2,875 to 3,875, which could reduce San Francisco's total unsheltered homeless population of over 5,000 by 19%, but only if the newly sheltered aren't replaced. In other words, the reason that there are so many homeless people on the streets in San Francisco is that both progressive and moderate Democratic elected officials and the city's most influential homelessness experts and advocates have for 2 decades opposed building sufficient shelters. And that is unlikely to change even after San Francisco starts spending hundreds of millions per year on the problem, and it might even get worse.
According to a statement from Supervisor Myrna Melger, this started with 2 train passengers in a heated argument as the train left Forest Hill Station headed to Castro Station. That's when witnesses described hearing 3 or 4 shots. San Francisco police rushed to Castro Station, but they did not find the shooter. They did find 2 victims. One was rushed to San Francisco General Hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, the other dead inside the train. Police have only released a very vague description of the shooter, telling us he was wearing dark clothes and a hooded jacket. But they're reviewing video and images from Muni cameras at their stations and aboard the train.
The second major problem is the lenient approach to drug use and criminality among the homeless. Complaints about human waste on San Francisco's sidewalks and streets were rising. Calls about human feces increased from 10,692 to 20,933 between 2014 and 2018. In 2019, the city spent nearly $100 million on street cleaning, 4 times more than Chicago, which has 3.5 times as many people and an area that is 4.5 times larger. Between 2015 and 2018, San Francisco replaced more than 300 lampposts corroded by urine after one had collapsed and crushed a car. After the passage of Proposition 47 in 2014, police could no longer keep meth-intoxicated speeders in jail for a few days to come down. Tom Wolfe, a former addict who Shellenberger interviewed, said, when Proposition 47 took effect, there were 115,000 homeless people in the state of California. Today there are 165,000. I believe that there's a direct correlation between the two. People that would have maybe cycled through the justice system for committing smaller crimes, like running into Walgreens, filling your backpack full of makeup and running out because you're a drug addict, might actually have found some help. Between 2016 and 2021, Walgreens closed 17 of its stores in San Francisco due to shoplifting. When a reporter in 2020 asked a clerk where all the merchandise from the empty shelves had gone, he said, "Go ask the people in the alleys. They have it all." Shellenberger interviews a man named Jabari Jackson, who the district attorney's office charged with strong-armed robbery, assault, and battery. Prosecutors added a hate crime charge because the two men that he had assaulted turned out to be gay. But the day Jabari was scheduled to stand trial, a woman walked into the courtroom, whispered something to Jabari's attorney, and the judge dismissed the jury. "Mr. Jackson, this is your lucky day," the judge said. "We're just going to put you on probation, credit time served, we're going to let you go." It turned out that Jabari's father's best friend was close with the district attorney. "My dad worked some kind of magic for me," said Jabari. By contrast, the other men involved in the mugging were sentenced to prison or to Walden House. Property crime was already on the rise when San Francisco voters made the inexplicable decision to elect terrorist spawn Kaiser Bodin as district attorney. Bodin's main goal is de-incarceration. "The challenge going forward," said Bodin, "is how do we close a jail?" Many believe that most in jail are there for non-violent offences, but the most recent available data shows that 2/3 of the people in San Francisco's jail were there for violent crimes or weapons possession, not petty, non-violent or victimless crime. Just 4% are there for drug crime. Home burglaries rose in early 2021 in San Francisco. Homeowners started posting on Twitter videos from their security cameras of people breaking into homes and garages. "When I first moved here, we had a car break-in problem," said Michael Solana, a writer who works for a venture capital fund. "Now we have a home invasion problem. These things are wearing on people." Bodin attributed the rise of burglaries in San Francisco to the decline of tourism, wonder why, and people in desperate economic circumstances. But Tom Wolfe, the addict Shellenberger interviewed, and others argued that the robberies were, like the shoplifting, done by people seeking money to buy drugs and feed their addictions. "The drugstores have been shoplifted to death, and that's all because of drug use," said Tom. "I know. I used to do the same thing when I was out there. That's what you do. You boost, and then you sell your stuff down at UN Plaza, an open-air drug scene." The problem goes beyond property crime. Bodin declined to prosecute 2 men who went on to kill people. One man had been repeatedly arrested for stealing cars despite having just been released from prison earlier the year, and appeared to be abusing meth. On New Year's Eve, 2020, the man killed 2 people while driving intoxicated. Police found inside of his car a semi-automatic handgun and 23 grams of methamphetamine. I am very pleased to be able to inform you that Mr. Bodin has proved too much even for San Francisco, and he was recalled in an election on the 7th of June 2022. The atmosphere surrounding the issue of homelessness is so ideologically charged that even healthcare professionals are scared to publicly speak out. The chief of psychiatry in a public hospital system in one of the largest California cities told me, "I know for a fact, and all my colleagues know, that what we actually need to deal with the problem in the biggest cities in California is long-term residential secure psychiatric care. But I can't say that publicly because I would be disemboweled by the activist left. My job would be in jeopardy, my reputation would be in jeopardy, my whole life would get turned upside down for even broaching the subject of expanding secure mental health facilities and compulsory mental health treatment.
Yeah, it's like San Francisco is more of a European city, like Paris or Milan.
As one of, if not the most progressive city in the US, San Francisco also has a very deep, entrenched culture of victim worship. Social psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, Corey Clark, notes, when society says, oh, these people who've had these bad things happen to them are victims, and we should feel sorry for them, and we should do everything we can to help them, people come to learn that playing the role of the victim gets them favors. Scholars call such excessive compassion pathological altruism, defined as behavior in which the attempts to promote the welfare of another or others results instead in harm that an external observer would conclude was reasonably foreseeable. Progressives will often point to factors like police racism as the root cause of all these problems. But like most progressive theories, it isn't supported by data, and Shellenberger, who once advocated for many of the policies he now criticizes, has learnt how many of the treasured progressive assumptions are false. He says, but much of what I believed back then turned out not to be true, or at least wasn't the whole truth. We already saw that just 14% of state prisoners are non-violent, low-level drug offenders, that 90% of all prisoners in the United States are in state, not federal prisons, and that many trends are going in the right direction. That also goes for police violence. Police killings of African Americans declined from 217 per year in the 70s to 157 per year in the 2010s, in the 58 largest US cities. Police killings of all races in New York City declined dramatically, from an average of 59 per year between 70 and 75 to an average of 12 per year between 2015 to 2020, even as its population increased. In San Francisco and Oakland, the rate of police killings per year increased slightly, going from 2.7 and 2.8 per year respectively in the 70s to 2.4 and 3.9 per year in the 2010s, but police killings per capita in the two cities declined by 8.3%. Why then did so many of us come to believe that police killings were rising and that racism was the main motivation behind them? Smartphones and the internet, combined with the fact that videos of white police officers and black victims are more likely to be shared than ones of black officers and white victims, appears to be part of the reason. We see the problems these attitudes cause manifesting themselves in other American cities, most notably with the establishing of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Officer Carmen Best of the Seattle Police Department describes how it came about. Then, in June, somebody removed a police barricade that had prevented demonstrators from protesting in front of the East Precinct downtown. It was decided, said Best, I'll put it that way, to remove the barricade and allow the demonstrators to fill in the street in front of the precinct. We didn't want to give up the precinct. I have to tell you, it was not my decision. Police officers inside the East Precinct building feared the protesters would throw Molotov cocktails through the windows and set the building on fire, and so they began removing items from the precinct in case it caught fire or was overrun by protesters. The next morning, there were these folks out there armed with long rifles, telling the officers who responded that it was their sovereign land, said Best. What sovereign property are they talking about? Well, they're talking about 12th Avenue, she laughs. We have never experienced anything like that, and therein began CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. The anarchist leaders invited hundreds of Seattle's homeless residents to move into the occupied zone, and many did. When asked, Seattle's mayor insisted that everything would work out fine. "How long do you think Seattle and those few blocks could look like this?" Chris Cuomo asked Seattle's mayor. "I don't know," she replied. "We could have a summer of love." Some of the city staff were talking to the occupiers, but that really wasn't working well either, because they were enablers, bringing in porta potties, handing out hand sanitizers, letting them tear up the park to build a vegetable farm, and memorializing the graffiti. It all seemed counterproductive to public safety. Soon the police started to get reports of crimes. "We were getting reports of rape, robbery, assault. I wasn't making it up," said Best. "These things were happening in a zone where it was very dangerous. There were people there who were armed. There's video out there. You can see them shooting up in there. I don't know what the Wild West was like, but it couldn't have been any worse than that." Seattle's mayor and city council started to change their tune after "the first person was murdered," said Best. They realized, "Oh, maybe this isn't as safe as we thought it might be." They should have called it the Seattle Police Abandoned Zone.
What's your name?
Al.
Speak up, come on.
Al.
Get a goddamn job, Al. You got a negative attitude. That's what's stopping you. You gotta get your act together. I'll help you.
In 2004, a man named Joel John Roberts published a plaintive book called How to Increase Homelessness. In it, he pointed out that for more than 30 years, a large and financially motivated lobby of homeless service providers, homeless housing developers, labor unions, for-profit consultants, and advocacy groups have lobbied at the federal, state, and local level to increase funding for themselves. During that time, homelessness only grew worse. I do not know of any community plan that actually details how to dismantle the existing homeless service system after homelessness has ended, wrote Roberts. Maybe, just maybe, we don't really want to end homelessness. Much of the resistance to involuntary psychiatric treatment is the legacy of Foucault's work, Madness and Civilization, and a 1973 study published in the journal Science. Titled On Being Sane in Insane Places by a Stanford sociologist, David Rosenhan, who claimed to have sent research assistants into several mental hospitals where they were misdiagnosed with mental illness. "We now know that we cannot distinguish insanity from sanity," he concluded. The study received widespread publicity and essentially eviscerated any vestige of legitimacy to psychiatric diagnosis, said the chairman of Columbia's Department of Psychiatry. "Psychiatrists look like unreliable and antiquated quacks, unfit to join in the research revolution," wrote another. Rosenhan's study became one of the most read and reprinted articles in the history of psychiatry, but a journalist in 2019 published a book describing so many discrepancies that she questioned whether it had ever even occurred. She only found one person who said that he had participated in the study, and he said he was treated well by the hospital and had been discharged simply because he had asked to leave. Liberals and progressives had gone, thanks in part to the ACLU, Foucault, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, from advocating humanistic psychiatric care to opposing it. Part of the reason progressives demand proof of mental illness in the form of violent assault, murder, or suicide is that they have lost faith in our capacity to recognize it and, at times, even denied its existence. The folly of this approach is easy to see. In 2016, after the city of San Francisco broke up a massive 350-person homeless encampment, dozens of the homeless refused the city's offers of help. Of the 150 people moved during a single month of homeless encampment cleanups in 2018, just 8 people accepted the city's offer of shelter. In 2004, just 131 people went into permanent supportive housing after 4,950 contacts were made by then-Mayor Newsom's homeless outreach teams. When asked about the issue of homelessness in California, progressives often cite the legacy of Ronald Reagan as governor and the Latterman-Petres-Short Act as the reasons, but their arguments ring hollow. While it is true that as governor, Reagan oversaw the closure of mental hospitals, he didn't start deinstitutionalization. It began nationally in the 1930s, mostly to save money. The closure of California's mental hospitals began in earnest in the 1950s, more than a decade before Reagan became governor. The emptying of state mental hospitals continued at the same rate between 1959 and 1967 under a Democratic governor as it did under Reagan. By the time Reagan took office in 1967, nearly half of the patients in California state mental hospitals had already been released. As for the Latterman-Petres-Short Act, it was a creation of civil libertarians, mental health professionals, and anti-psychiatry activists, sponsored by 2 Democrats and passed in a 77-1 vote. It would have passed even if Reagan had vetoed it. Nor can a lack of funding explain the problem. There's a shitload of money, said the mental health advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom, psychiatrist Thomas Insel, spelt with an S, fortunately for him, who served as the director of the Federal National Institute of Mental Health from 2002 to 2015. We think $11 billion goes into California's state mental health budget every year. That makes California the number 1 per capita spending in the United States. No state spends as much as we do. And yet when you look at the rankings by Mental Health America and National Alliance on Mental Illness, we're not in the top half. We're 26th for Mental Health America, but for children, we're number 38. That's not great. In his book published in 2009, American Homicide, Randolph Roth demolishes the standard progressive trope about poverty and structural racism being the root cause of all crime. In his analysis, Roth finds little evidence to support the claim that root causes like poverty and structural racism cause crime rates to rise and fall. African American crime rates were lower during the 1940s and 50s when segregation was legal, poverty more widespread, and discrimination more overt than between 1965 and 1990. Indeed, homicides among African Americans shot up despite the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's true that homicides rose during the first few years of the Great Depression, but they then declined in most major cities afterwards, and crime rates, including for homicide, kept declining even after the 2007 financial crash and resulting recession, the worst since the Great Depression. Shellenberger discusses how he and a gentleman called Ethan Nadelman were very active in drug decriminalization and harm reduction in the early 90s, which produces this very interesting little anecdote. Around the summer of 92, I get a phone call from George Soros, Ethan said. We had lunch and hit it off. He didn't know what harm reduction was. He was coming at this because he saw how open society ideals were being violated. As a business person and economist, he saw the absurdity of trying to ban a popular commodity. Soros, whose many philanthropic initiatives included drug policy reform, gave Ethan millions in funding to change drug laws around the country. So if any of your loved ones have died from opioid abuse over the last 20 years in America, remember that George Soros spent millions of pounds to help make that a possibility. So what are the realities for the average San Franciscoan who has to live with the consequences of these policies?
Check this out. Median home prices in San Francisco have fallen by more than $300,000 in 3 months.
Between 2008 and 2019, 18,000 companies, including Toyota, Charles Schwab, and Hewlett-Packard, fled California due to a constellation of problems sometimes summarized as a poor business climate. California has the highest income tax, highest gasoline tax, and highest sales tax in the United States, spends significantly more than other states on homelessness, and yet has worse outcomes. The homeless and their families also suffer. Say Jackie, whose son Corey was homeless in San Francisco and compared it to Pleasure Island from Pinocchio, said, "My son has also been hospitalized twice from being stabbed. One time he almost died. I didn't even know he was in hospital until he was well enough to call me. After that, I bought him a medical alert bracelet with my info on it. He eventually lost it, of course, so I planned to have my phone number tattooed on his chest. He agreed, but because of COVID, tattoo parlors are closed. Lucky for Corey." There is also substantial evidence of the catastrophic impact that anti-police attitudes can have on public safety. In 2015, the US Department of Justice asked one of the country's leading criminologists, Richard Rosenfeld, from the University of Missouri St. Louis, to investigate whether homicides had, in fact, risen after Ferguson. At first, Rosenfeld was skeptical. He noted that homicides in St. Louis had already started rising before 2014. But after looking at the evidence, he changed his mind. The homicide increase in the nation's largest cities was real and nearly unprecedented, he wrote in his 2016 report. Rosenfeld found that a 17% rise in homicide in the nation's largest cities between 2014 and 2015. Counter to the claims of those who advocate defunding the police as a way to reduce violence, the evidence suggests that fewer cops may mean more police misconduct because the remaining officers must work longer and more stressful hours. Researchers found that fatigue predicts a rise in public complaints against cops. A 13-hour rather than 10-hour shift significantly boosts their prevalence, while back-to-back shifts quadruple their odds. Shellenberger points to schemes that have had some success. One such program is Hawaii's Opportunity Probation with Enforcement. It incentivized offenders to follow probation rules by applying guaranteed, immediate and short-term jail time for parole violations, like failing a drug test. One study found that HOPE reduced drug use by 72%, future arrests by 55%, and incarceration by 48%. One researcher summarized the benefits of the program. HOPE actually gets people to change their behavior by setting up a circumstance where their natural behavior moves in the right direction. They don't want to be arrested and go to jail, so they stopped using. That's a profoundly rehabilitative thing to do. What struck me most while reading this book was how, despite all the virtue signaling, the San Francisco political establishment seemed to care as much about the homeless as the guys who made this.
Yeah! BFK for life! Forever! Yes! We everybody! Yeah! Yeah! Oh, yeah, we love it.
All right. Belly flop on it. Okay. 1.
Human sympathy is like a well, and mine is running pretty dry at the moment, and I really can't spare any for the self-inflicted miseries of the people of San Francisco. It does appear that for once, everyone can agree that there is a problem, but there is a significant plurality of solutions. Here's mine.
Fellow executives, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the future of law enforcement. Ed 209.
If you want to see the depths of delusions on the left over this issue, go and see some of the responses to this tweet from Anna Kasparian. Obviously not someone that I like very much, but I mean, at least on this issue, maybe finally starting to realize that you got it wrong.